As you climb up Helsby Hill, you come through the Helsby Quarry and Nature Reserve, and it's a hot day today, so it's been really good to walk under the trees and also through some interesting bits of rock and tunnels. Down below in Helsby itself, it's a good transport link for bus and trains. There's a station at Helsby on the main Chester to Manchester line, and the bus services run between Chester and Warrington, amongst other places. The buses come out of the Runcorn depot, where they in 2017 bought 9 biogas buses which run on waste products, so very fuel efficient, carbon neutral bus that runs through here in Helsby. Well, as you can see, I have to be careful flying on top of the hill here because it's quite windy and the drone might sort of get blown away, but I haven't taken it too high. I also have to be careful that people walking dogs everywhere, that they don't get scared or they don't start chasing it, more to the point. So anyway, it gives you a bit of a bird's eye view of Helsby Hill. Okay, there's a hole there, and another one. Let's have a close-up of the obelisk. In this month's video, we've spent a couple of days going up and down the Keithley and Worth Valley Railway, looking at some of the stations and locations around the trackside. There'll be more later on, so keep watching. If you're a railway enthusiast, this is definitely your month. So for 25 years I've been living on a country lane, and I quite like to get back to civilization. And I know a lot of people wouldn't agree with me on that, but as you can see, we have now found a buyer for our bungalow. So we're on the move. The solicitors usually take a couple of months, so I've got time to pack everything away, and we can start looking around the Wirral for a flat to live in, a lock up and leave property. And just to fill in those 2 months, I'm going to be showing you the story of the back garden. Now, while I've been living here, back garden's been my baby. I put a huge pond in 2000 well, between 2001 and 2003, built various stages of a back wall and a pond and filled it with fish and created a waterfall, and then that all sort of went to pot. So last year I decided to try and revive the whole area, and it didn't quite turn out as I expected. But here's the story, starting in March when we first got locked down and going through to August. After bringing my friend Bob in to build a low retaining wall, I started on the garden itself. Now, there were two problems. One, the pond, which when I started in April was starting to dry out, and the weather was quite dry, if you remember, last April. The other was the half of the garden that had been just rocks and waterfalls and other odd things over the years. And now, as I started to excavate it, I found that there were lateral roots just everywhere. Dealing with the garden that's mostly clay is hard enough, but all the roots are pretty tough that need digging out and breaking off. And then, of course, I discovered this bit of a garden railway that I'd started and forgotten about. I had emptied a 1-ton bag of gravel onto a bit of tarpaulin in one corner of the garden, while I continued to flatten and weed out the back section near the new retaining wall. I was spreading sand on this and looking for it to be as reasonably flat as I could make it. The second job then with the gravel was to move it all to the back side of the garden onto a piece of weed control fabric, it's called. It doesn't seem to work. To stop the gravel spilling out into a drainage gully alongside the building, I put a row of single bricks, and I'm no bricklayer, but just chucked a bit of mortar around some bricks to hold gravel in place. June was not the driest of months. I got a good deal of the pond cleared out, and I'd actually gone and stood in the mud and pulled out loads of weed and stuff and got myself really muddy. But then the rain came and started to fill the pond up again, and I felt like I'd been defeated. So I took advantage of the wet clay soil and managed to move it out of the way. The project moved on a bit, and I managed to get some decking down. The pond, as you can see, had slightly filled again, but there was a plan to deal with that, which didn't come until 2021, and I'll deal with that in next month's video. But there it is, that's how far I got by August 2020.
A big hello and welcome for those of you who've just joined us here in the Higher Kinnerton Village Day. We're going to play some music and we'll be talking to you throughout the day.
Well, this is the Kinnerton Village Day, and this is our home village for the very last time. We may well come back here in the future, but we're moving out. We've sold our bungalow, so cheers to that. We're heading for the Wirral, but before we go, we're going to enjoy the drinks and the food and everything else, the entertainment that this particular village fun day has to offer.
and welcome to those of you just joined us here at the Higher Kinnerton Village Day 2021. We welcome you, and it's so good to see you all, and thank you for supporting our village events.
I'm not usually a person for visiting churches and cathedrals, but this is Chester Cathedral. It's in our nearest city to where we currently still live. It's a pretty impressive building, and somebody's captured it in Lego, and that was on display during the summer inside the cathedral. Between mid-July and early September, this gentleman was to be seen in the cathedral, and he brought the West Coast Main Line with him. Well, he made a model of parts of the West Coast Main Line. You may know that Pete Waterman is a bit of a railway fan in many ways, in the real locomotives that he works with, and also in these model trains. If you wanted to go and see this, I'm afraid it's just closed and you've missed it, but if you did get there, you will have had a chance to talk to Pete Waterman, as he was there quite a lot, talking to enthusiasts. If you wanted to buy some trains of your own, the local model shop was in evidence and you could have made some purchases while you were there. And if you're interested in trains generally, then I've got more for you later in this month's video. The Keithley and Worth Valley Railway was where the original Railway Children film was shot many decades ago, but the good news is that it's coming back in 2022. In fact, there's the new Railway Children film to be released. Now, while we were there, we had a look round the film set where the latest film was produced, and to me, always interesting to look at the backgrounds behind the scenes of videos, TV, films. Doesn't matter to me, I like to see how it's all done. So we saw some of these vintage sets from, I presume, a 50s or 60s setting, and the reality of it all was right behind that was the sort of timber framework that it was all fixed on. Now, if you've ever built a stud wall, you'll know that it's a fairly sturdy affair, but when you look at the scenery here, It's on quite a thin structure of wooden beams with plywood on, and they're sort of painted and decorated on the other side. You can understand why some people in the past have referred to the fact that scenery seems to move. It wouldn't take much for some of this scenery to actually shake as people ran about or walked about on the set. This is inside the museum at the Worth Valley Railway, so they've got all these locomotives and carriages on hand, so if they wanted to film on any of the rolling stock, it was always just alongside them. We went in the summer and I had a look around the museum. These engines are big when you're standing alongside them, but I gather the film that's coming out next year was made in the winter, so we're going to see a bit of snow and so on. They recently had an anniversary, and the anniversary train is in the museum as well. So maybe that's a reason for you to head over to Yorkshire and have a look at the Keithley and Worth Valley Railway.
It was like a great dragon tearing by.
Well, I look forward to the Railway Children returning to our screens next year. Now, remember a year ago, as lockdowns began, 18 months ago actually, in March, this was a room that was a junk room, and I turned it into a studio to work in while I was stuck at home for 18 months. It's a junk room again. We're moving house, as you probably gathered, so everything is getting dumped into boxes and crates ready for the move, and this room is being taken apart. So the reverse of what happened last March is now happening again, and we're moving out of here. So by next month you should see this as an empty room. In the meantime, let's go back to railways, and we're going to the park as well. The Grosvenor Park in Chester has a miniature railway that you can sit on and ride, and we took a little trip down there to see how that was going, and we're pleased to see that the locomotives were once again being fuelled up. I was looking at vintage cars and tractors a few months ago and discussing the kind of fuels they use and whether you'd still be able to get it in the future. Now, when you look at a preservation railway, there are the diesels which came into use in the 60s, and prior to that this was the stuff that they were running them on. They still need to have loads of coal. Now, they've told us they're going to stop mining coal, so what are these steam engines going to run on in the future if we're to keep them going? We're still running our road vehicles on diesel today, and many of the trains on the tracks across Britain are also still diesel, so that is going to carry on for some time. It's not just going to suddenly stop in 10 years' time. Steam has really already died away, and if you look at a steam engine, it burns coal and puts out quite a lot of smoke into the atmosphere, and some of that steam, of course, as it's boiling water at the same time, that's not going to be seen as that environmentally friendly. So I wonder what will happen to these trains in the future. Anyway, we're in a compartment on our own, and we're travelling along from Keithley to Oxenhope. Along the way, watch out for some of the other trains and rolling stock that you see, including a locomotive from the USA, and some of the trains that I've been waiting for them to take out of service for years. Northern Rail is still running some of these trains that you see here in blue. We've stopped at Haworth, which is where some of the buildings and locations for the Railway Children film are, and we found ourselves a place for lunch. It was quite well hidden, but we spotted it across the river and found our way to it on foot and had our nice little lunch out here on the decking. Well, this part of the show has nothing to do with railways, and it has a lot to do with property, which is the thing that keeps me going day to day, week to week. In our house of multiple occupancy on the Wirral, we've been using these heaters for years, so we've started investing in a program of proper electric radiators, and Handyman Bob has been putting the first one in place. It's a very nice heater, but unfortunately we put it in a stud wall that wasn't up to the job. These oil-filled radiators are rather heavy, and this one fell out of the wall and did a fair amount of damage. The answer was to reinforce the wall, so we opened up the plasterboard and put some more studs in, some more wooden timber in other words, and that gave it more support, and then the radiator was put back on the wall, and I've still got to replace the element which was damaged, and it's going to cost me £130. Other replacements including the outside lights, which have been there for decades. I've already replaced the garden chairs, the others are in a poor state. Ivy has eaten through the fence, so we've been having to remove that. It's completely wrecked. But we're not allowed to deal with the ivy until the autumn, when there are no further birds nesting. You may not be able to see the birds here, but we heard them when we were removing the fence. They started protesting a bit. One of our tenants left his room a couple of months ago, and we found that he'd moved all the furniture into different places from the ones that we put them in. Well, it's not for me to say how the room should be arranged. If it's comfortable for the tenant, that's fine by me. But the first thing we did was put everything back where we think it should be, and then I made a quick promotional advert to go on the internet to promote the room to prospective tenants. I offered to get the back garden weeded and cleared and to employ a gardener, and the tenants said no. They liked the sort of wild effect of being out there in the wilderness, so I'm having to leave that for now. The front garden I'm definitely going to get something done to, because the weeds, as much as we keep on weeding them, keep coming back and they get taller and taller. One day we won't be able to see out of the house for weeds. Well, that's all for this month, so I'm going to leave you with a little more video from the Keithley and Worth Valley Railway, and hope that our railway enthusiast viewers have enjoyed this collection of trains large and small. See you in October.
It was like a great dragon tearing by.